Ladies and gentlemen, today is July 22nd, 2019, and this is the Can Kale Show, where we learn to be better artists. My name is Kienan Lafferty, and I would like to welcome you to another show. Today we're going to be talking about dynamic illustration, ladies and gentlemen. Dynamic illustration featuring Mocha from Made of Metal. We're going to be talking about how we laid this out, and we're going to be using our handy color comps, or not color comps, layer comps, to take us through different phases of this piece. And this is a big piece. So, of course, we're going to be taking a step back in time, in history, to not only back to these masks, but even back to the very beginning of the thumbnails. And if you'd like to be following along, you can download today's PSD as well as all the other PSDs from the past over on Patreon. And if you stick around till the end of the video, I got a very special surprise for you, which with keen eyes, you can probably see a little secret of what you're going to get. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started with this. Let's go ahead and get started with this piece. So as you know, all of my pieces, I like to begin with, right, the finished piece. It just slaps itself right down on the canvas. No, of course. We need to, of course not. We need to start with our thumbnails, okay? Early, humble thumbnails, sitting there and scrolling away, getting our general idea down, okay? Now, the purpose of thumbnails is to fail faster, okay? I've told you guys this many times. You don't want to spend hours on a piece and then finally get to the realization that, hey, you know what? This entire piece, like, it's not working. Like, you can see right here, this is a general outline of what Mocha's silhouette would be. And we can get a general idea of, hey, look at that. We can see some nice light values that allows our character to come through, and we can very quickly gauge how we want the balance of our piece to look. Same thing up in here. You can see we have a general silhouette of Mocha along with a brighter background. So here we have kind of a darker, giving it a more mysterious vibe. This was used in one of the recent Mika pieces. And then we have, you know, things like this right here with much brighter, more clear reads on our silhouettes, which is going to come in very handy for big pieces like this, okay? You need to have very clear reads when there's a ton of crap happening in your piece, okay? But we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into how to balance things and how to pull things back from the brink of despair. The brink of you think things aren't gonna work out, but I will show you how to add effects and make things look a lot more clear. Okay, so this is the basic idea. This is how I get started. Each of these thumbnails is taking me maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and if I like it, that's great. If I don't, then that's awesome. We saved a ton of time, we failed faster, and we got to a point where we started saying, hey, I think that one of these isn't going to suck that bad. So let's go ahead and move on from thumbnails. Let's go ahead and move into thumbnail large. So what I'll do is I'll take one of these thumbnails and I'll move into what I like to call the phase of thumbnail large. And I'll basically blow up a thumbnail and begin kind of refining and just, again, getting my general silhouette and shapes in there, okay? You can see here very clearly Mocha on our left side, and then we have the monstrous being on the right side. Now, what we want to begin doing is from here, we want to start laying in line art. And line art is a very fun stage because we get to also learn about perspective and getting characters to actually follow the rules of this world. Because if you're going to be doing dynamic angles, if you're going to be doing dynamic illustration, you're going to want to make sure that your line art and just the general entire thing is following some sense of perspective and rules, okay? Now I hear you crying out. I hear the cries of the artist learning. Oh my gosh, Keenan, I hate perspective. I hate it so much. I hate drawing lines and I don't like this crap. I just want to draw what's from my soul, right? And I hear you. But unfortunately, well, actually, and fortunately, I figured out a really easy way. And when I say figure out, I actually watched somebody else do it and I stole it. But I'm going to show you how to do really quick perspective, okay? So just for fun, follow along with me. Create a new canvas. In this case, it's just 1080 by 1080. Hit Shift-Control-N, create a new layer. And your magic tool is going to be right over here. You can see the shape tool. You might have to click and hold to get to the polygon tool. Go ahead and click that. Make sure your fill up here is set to nothing. And then make sure your stroke is set to, I don't know, blue or something. You can choose anything. I prefer to just choose black because I'll show you how to easily change the color as you go forward, okay? This thing right here, 1 pixel, I don't think that makes a difference. This thing, you want to make sure it's a solid line Width, that doesn't mean anything. Height, that doesn't mean anything. But you're going to want to go over to this gear right here. This gear right here is really awesome because you're going to go to make sure that you have star selected. You are going to indent your sides by 99%. I don't know what the default status is, but make sure it's set to 99%. And then on the sides, you're going to set that to 100 right here. Just 100. Boom. And now watch what happens when you take this polygon and you pull it apart. Whoa, what does that look like to you? Oh my gosh, that looks like a perfect vanishing point. That is correct. And what do we do with vanishing points? Well, we can stick them anywhere we want. We can put it off the page. And, well, let's say we wanted to do a quick 2-point perspective. So hold Alt, and with your Move tool selected, hold Alt and move yourself a second vanishing point. Oh my gosh, have we just figured out a way to cheat the system? And the answer is yes, we have. We have absolutely figured out a way to cheat the system. You can even do a third one. Hold Alt and drag again. And now, but right before your very eyes, you are creating 3-point perspective. And now the trick is that, of course, there are limits to this, right? There is a limit, and that is called the cone of vision. You want to be thinking about your cone of vision. And here's a little hint. It's going to be somewhere within here. So where these two vanishing points are, notice how there is a correlation between them. They're on the same horizon. I love how this turned into a quick perspective lesson. But anyway, horizon. This perspective and this perspective, or rather this vanishing point and this vanishing point, must be connected on the horizon. And then this one called the nadir. I think that's the nadir. Either way, North Star. I'm pretty sure that's how I remembered it. N for North Star, nadir, looking up. Regardless, it's the third vanishing point going towards the top. That one is up there. And your cone of vision is basically where your piece is going to exist within. So let's say, and actually I can show you exactly where mine exists. We're going to go ahead and move all of these suckers down a notch because, as you know, in my piece, we actually have our frame. We can see just the edges of the grass on the horizon. See here? Oops! Oh, spoiled the surprise for the end. Well, yeah, spoiled the surprise for the end, but that's okay. You can see here we have some of the grass from the foreground. Therefore, our horizon line is just barely visible. And then we have the nadir, which is us looking up into the sky way up here. So we know that our perspective is going to be set up in a way where it's sort of like this. Our piece is basically existing within this area. Let me go ahead and draw a quick mocha with a sword. Yeah! And then we have our monster. Okay? And see, now that you have that general thing set up, now that you have your general framework set up within your perspective, now you can begin drawing things. You can begin taking it all the way back to the line art. And now your line art, you can see here that I've actually colored my perspective lines just to help me further understand which one is going which way. I tend to make the third, like Z-space vanishing point green, and then one of them magenta and the other one blue, just to help clear up any confusion. Now again, these perspective lines are not perfect, but they are a great way to get started, and you just saw how much time we saved by doing this. It's so awesome. It's so freaking awesome. And oftentimes, what I like to do to save a bit of space, because you'll see that actually these things exist way off to the side, right? There's a lot of extra space that these are taking up. So what I like to do is oftentimes I'll just merge these down. I'll merge them down and rasterize it. Rasterize that layer. Hit Control A, hit Control J, and then what that does is it basically crops it at the edges. So that way, you know, if you're working with a high, you know, res canvas, it doesn't take up too much space. Because sometimes you might move your, here's a good example. This is a really good example. I need to get into this. So let's say that you wanted your perspective to be sort of different. Let's say that you wanted your vanishing point to be way off to the side. See how much more we have to mess around with this? See how much space that's taking up? We want to make sure that we crop that at the end. I found that it's nice to kind of do this if you're pushing your vanishing point off to the side. It tends to make it look a little bit nicer. And then you can, again, kind of move this over to create another one. There you go. There you go. And like I said, each of these perspective lines, as you change it, it will change the perspective of your piece. It will change the perspective of your piece. Just make sure, like I said, that both of these line up on a horizon line. Because if you put one way down here, it starts to not really make sense. In order for this to make sense, in order for your horizon line to be off kilter, you need to make sure that both of those vanishing points are off kilter too. So the way that you do that is by taking the entire thing like this, right? And then you're going to tilt it like that, okay? For some reason that didn't grab the horizon. But that is the way to do it. That is the way to do it. Is that our horizon? Why did it not tilt that? I have no idea why it did not tilt that. But either way, you get what I'm saying. Make sure those two vanishing points are on the same horizon. Now, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get back into the line art. Now, with that in place, now you can see the space that your drawing should be occupying, okay? And I'm actually glad that I took a little bit of extra time on perspective because it is a subject I have avoided for many, many years, and only recently have I begun to realize that it is very important to creating dynamic illustrations and making sure that your characters are existing in the proper space. And especially once you start putting in backgrounds, which we're going to get into as well, all those background pieces need to be following the same perspective. Okay? Or not always the same perspective, but in this case, you know, because I'm kind of getting started, I like to just have the background follow the same perspective. You can obviously have things that are changed and, like, say, rubble that's in a completely different perspective, you know, like a door shooting at you. You know, that obviously wouldn't always be following the lines of this perspective. But regardless, that's another lesson for another time. Okay? So the next thing that I want to get into is with the line art. You can see here, obviously Mocha doesn't have all of her clothes on yet. I like to make sure that I get the anatomy looking proper before I start layering all of those additional, her plaid and her leather armor and all the additional pieces on her. I want to make sure that her legs are looking proper. And it's really easy to set this up in perspective early on if you just draw, say, the anatomy and then lay on the clothes. Okay, so that's my tip to you, ladies and gentlemen. The next thing that I want to talk about is this monster and just how much actual concept goes into creating this. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up because I have an additional concept in here that was for the beast. You can see here, this was me figuring out exactly, I was hoping I could do it on the fly, but it just doesn't work that way. It is always going to make your piece better if you have some additional time to concept out exactly what this monster is going to look like. And for me, I wanted it to look like a beast, but I wanted it to have specifically these Celtic runes kind of written on its forehead, along its ear, along its body. Okay, and even just doing this allowed me to take it from this, which was, it was kind of a skull. I kind of had the idea that I wanted it to look like a wolf skull or something similar, but then we went to this, and I felt like this was a lot more well-designed, a lot more interesting. Let's go ahead and move on to part two. Part two, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be jumping into masks. We're going to be talking about lighting. We're going to be talking about backgrounds. Hey, look at that. Do you see how those castles are straight up jutting to the side, yet they still don't look weird? It's adding to the dynamics of our piece, and that's because of our awesome perspective. As I said before, all of the, you can see here, the buildings are all following that same perspective, even to the point where they're getting a little bit distorted. I would say this is a little bit outside of what your normal cone of vision should be. There's going to be some distortion there, but regardless, because they're following the rules that you set up early on, you can do stuff like that. You can have towers that are seriously straight, like sticking out straight to the side, and they won't look out of place because everything else is following those same rules. Okay, but regardless, let's go ahead and talk about lighting. Let's talk about lighting. Or should we talk about background first? Nah, let's do lighting first. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to get from here to here. Okay, here to here. Now, the way that I like to do this, let's go ahead and open up Mocha's folder here. And let's talk about how I start off my masks. So as you know, I like to create semi-clean line art. You can see here, it's not the cleanest. It's more line sculpted, as I like to call it. It's not completely lower down the opacity and do multiple passes over and over and over again, mostly because I'm lazy and I like to just kind of get this stuff done and move on as fast as possible. Not to mention, I know I'll be doing a lot of overpainting at the end, but my masks at the beginning, I tend to do what is called a character mask, which is just our silhouette like that. And then what I'll do is I'll begin creating new layers on top of it. And notice how all these layers are very, very dark. For Mocha's kilt here, for her plaid, we have a very dark red. And the reason why I'm doing all of this is because I like to go in there and I create these new layers, which are actually clipped back. And these are lighting layers. I find it so much easier to light your character than to paint shadows, right? Start with light colors and then paint dark shadows. I find it much easier to begin with dark colors and then, like I said, add on the lights. You can see going on the plaid, and each of these are clipped back. You can see what happens if I unclip them by holding Alt and clicking between. You can see how it's all messy and all over the place. No, we can't have that. But because we have a clean mask behind, see how that mask is nice and clean, what this does is that Alt clicking between the two, it basically grabs the light and it sticks it on the right spot. And in this case, I had two red, it looks like I had two different red masks, or three different red masks. You can see one was like for the inside, another one was for the outside. Like I said, I usually don't go to this level of detail on these. See how that's just the inside portion of her plaid? Yeah, like I said, but I'm trying to get a little bit more organized. And organization, I think, is the next big step that I can give you, or the next big tip that I can give you for creating dynamic pieces. Dynamic pieces. Moving on, let's go ahead and continue with the hair. You can see a little bit of light there. And then we have the lighting on the skin. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice, ladies and gentlemen? And the fur, and I think you can kind of get the idea of this. Next, what we do here is, what I've said many times before, is coloring your lines. And I want to zoom in for this because I really want you to take a look, almost on a pixel level, what coloring the lines actually does. This prepares your line art and it makes it look a lot less comic booky. See how those harsh black lines, especially on Mocha's face, tend to make it look like it's like smudged with something like charcoal. But if we lighten those up, it automatically makes everything become softer, starts to feel more rendered and nice. So coloring the lines is simply done by same thing that we did before, that clipping mask. Unclip it and you can see all the crazy colors that we're using to color those lines. But if we clip it back to what is essentially Mocha's line art, you can see here if I click it on and off, I can even move it to the side, see, just the line art. We can do the same thing. We can color and Alt click between the two and say those colors only affect the lines. And boom, there you have it. Nice little trick for you. A nice little way to get ready for what we like to call overpainting. Overpainting. Overpainting is right here as you're following along, I'm sure. Overpainting is the next thing. This is where I begin to go in, and this is why I don't do a lot of clean line art, because I know I'm going to go in and begin getting rid of all those tiny little artifacts. You can see up by your shoulder, up on the fur, just clicking on and off. I'm really beginning to define and almost redo the line art here. So I know that if I actually bothered to make super clean line art, I'd probably end up overpainting it anyway. So that's the way I kind of see it. I like to have messier line art at the beginning because it allows me to get started on coloring and painting earlier. And coloring and painting is arguably the best part for me. It is my favorite part, and I like to get to that as quickly as possible. Throwing on a little bit of multiplication masks, a little bit of glow. Again, all these are just little things that are leading up to our final piece. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the monster. Let's talk about lighting the monster. And then we will speed things up and get ourselves into effects. Effects are the way to, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about lighting our monster. Lighting our monster. Where is this thing? Here we go. Okay. So lighting the monster was actually quite easy because we have the color palette on the monster is so much more simple. It's mostly a dark colored monster with kind of lighter gray hair. And like I said, it's very easy. Like I said, start dark and you can see how easy it is to just paint in those colors. And bear in mind, I'm keeping in mind like, okay, where is the light coming from? What is the most intense light that is going to be affecting these characters? And in this case, I knew that I wanted to have a firelight, okay? I knew that there was going to be a firelight at the very bottom. And how did I know that there was going to be a firelight? In fact, I should have talked about this a little bit earlier, but actually I'm glad that we're getting into it now. How am I knowing what colors to even pick for the background, for the fire, for the colors of the characters? And here's how I like to do that. At the point where I get to my masks like this, right around this point, is where I like to save my piece. I'll flatten the entire thing down, and I'm going to take it over to a new canvas. And basically what I do is I just slap it down on the canvas as is, like this. And it doesn't even have to be high res. In fact, a smaller canvas will work to your benefit here, because what you're going to be working on is just overpainting and slapping colors on top and experimenting. So you can see here, the first thing I did was I said, okay, I want some brighter firelight to be happening from the bottom. Dynamic pieces, I find that having the camera angle below the characters, having light that comes up from beneath them makes it feel powerful, makes it feel ominous, mysterious. It's very unnatural to have light coming from beneath something. So immediately it's going to command some attention, okay, like fire. Okay, and one by one, you can see that each of these layers we are adding onto it. We are adding onto it right here. You can see that's where I take the point and say, I want to make sure that the light is hitting that monster and it's a warm light. So I know that we're going to be using kind of like this nice desaturated kind of reddish. And you might be asking, well, how did you know exactly that color, Keenan? How did you know? And the answer is you just experiment. And similar to at the beginning when we were working with our thumbnails, this is the chance for you to make a ton of mistakes and fail quicker, but on a color sense. And now what you can do is say if you don't like the way that it looks, you can easily paint over, you can start things over, you can try a completely different color comp. It was just in this case where I was pretty dang confident. I tend to be pretty dang confident with my color comps, and I can figure things out pretty dang quick. And I was pretty happy with this. And we made it look all pretty. We're saying pretty quite a bit. So anyway, continuing. Let us continue with moving on to the final. So once we got everything looking good, we know what colors we want to be using and what colors we want to be throwing onto the canvas. We got to this point. And it was at this point where I took a look at myself. I took a long, hard look at the canvas and I said, these values are not interesting enough. It's not clear enough. If I squint my eyes, yeah, I can kind of see Mocha's silhouette. I can kind of see this monster, but it's not nearly to the point of where I wanted it to be. And this is what I had in my mind's eye. You can kind of compare these back and forth. Now see the difference here. Colors are popping, colors are becoming more vivid. Again, squint your eyes. You can see more detail in Mocha's face at this point. And just all of the colors begin to feel, all the values and colors begin to mix together. And the way that we're going to be doing this is we're going to be jumping into what I like to call effects. Effects to clean up your sloppy work from before and make it look much better. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on with this. So, but before we do that, I want to talk a little bit more about the background. Let's talk a little bit more about this background. Backgrounds, I've found, I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I want to do a little bit more. I want to do a better tutorial on this as I get better at doing backgrounds. But here's what I basically learned from this piece here. And that is that backgrounds can tend to be very, very simple with shapes. And they will follow basically a rule of, as things go further back, they will take on the properties of the atmosphere. Okay, so you can see here, something that is close to us, like this castle wall, is kind of like this desaturated blue color. But as we move further back in space, look at how it takes on more of this purplish of the sky here, takes on more purplish, and it's lightening in value, meaning it's moving up. And as we move further back, look, it's lightening up even further, to the point where it will join in with these clouds. So that is the general sense of what we're talking about here. And furthermore, as I said before, as you are designing your backgrounds, one of the most common mistakes that people make when they are drawing backgrounds is that they don't consider putting in perspective grids. Perspective grids are super important for making sure that things feel the proper size and are following, like I said, the rules of your perspective. So that way they look like they're believable. Okay? So yeah, in a nutshell, this background, what I learned was that you can get away a lot with just having simple shapes. And you can see that there's not a lot of detail. There's not a lot of detail in these castle walls or like these towers. It's just silhouettes. And that's what I would like you to start focusing on for your backgrounds. Focus on just the silhouettes, because that is going to give you 99% of the detail and fill your viewer in on what is happening back there. and just worry less about going in there and drawing tons of little tiny bricks and little windows and stuff. Just focus on your silhouettes. Okay. Finally, for backgrounds and just general skyscapes, what I find very handy to do is to compose the entire thing in black and white. And that's exactly what I did here. I just started in black and white. I got a color kind of value range that I liked. And then what I did was I threw on a gradient map. And I've talked about gradient maps before. The way that you do it is you just go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then you hit Gradient Map. And what this does is basically it says, okay, we are now going to apply anything that's on the left, that takes the place of the darker values. So let's say we wanted our darker values to be blue. And then as our piece became lighter, we wanted our lighter values to be green. See, and then you can add colors in between. Let's say we wanted to add in purple. Anything like this. But see how now you can begin very quickly laying in general ideas for how you want your background to look. And you can kind of adjust the lighting on the fly like this by moving these sliders around. I find this so helpful for just getting started with these giant landscapes, giant skyscapes, things where there's supposed to be very subtle gradients, but you don't have to worry about like having the perfect, transition or trying to get that with your soft brush. Just use gradient maps, okay? Just do it. Just do it and thank me later. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, we're finally ready to move on to part 3. And that is the point where you look at your piece and you're like, what the heck have I done? How do I fix this? How do I put some effects on there to get things looking proper and get it ready for Instagram, baby? And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to talk about, let's talk about final overpaints. Let's talk about final overpaints. And unfortunately, I don't think that I have these. I don't have the exact overpaints because usually what I like to do is like kind of pull them off and you can see exactly what those were. But in this case, I ended up flattening it down, which is unfortunate, but it happens. I think Mocha's case, on the other hand, is a little bit different. We do have a little bit of overpaints. We have some overpaints on her plaid, as well as an OP on her face. And this is actually good because this will help me to very concisely tell you why I do overpaints. What is the purpose of overpaints? And in this case, you can see most of the time I look at the character's face and I'll squint my eyes and I ask, is this the character that I want to come through? Is it clear? And in this case, I didn't like how dark the shadow was above her nose and in her eye, basically like in her eye socket. So what I ended up doing here was lightening up those values. You can see squinting your eyes. Now her face, well, the problem is that this shape was blending into her hair. You can see that this value is very similar to the hair. So it's just blending in. We needed to make sure to separate that. So I did that with an overpaint. And then similarly to the plaid, it's such a pain in the butt to like try to paint plaid and then shadow everything. So rather just paint the plaid at the very end. Paint those textures at the very end. And then what's cool is that let's say there's a little bit of an overshoot right here. See how that's kind of blending into the leather piece right there? You can just go ahead and erase it away from wherever it might be overshooting. Find this to be super helpful when doing overpaints, but I'll leave that in there just for your reference. Okay, now and the next thing that I did here, oh yes, the next thing that I would highly suggest for getting your piece on point is flatten down your characters. This is another really good thing about staying organized is you are able to flatten your characters and you're able to go, in this case, let's say brightness contrast. And you can fiddle around with your brightness contrast to make sure that you're getting a general good look for things, right? You can mess around with this stuff. I like to do that to make sure that my lights are feeling nice and punchy, nice and vivid. Again, you don't want to overdo it. Overdoing it makes it a little crazy, but again, it allows you to get closer to the point that you're looking for the final piece, okay? Don't feel like you might look at the final piece and be like, oh man, I need to get my values all perfect from the beginning. Not the case. In fact, hardly ever the case. I am now fully converted over to being a believer of using as many filters and as many things in Photoshop to your advantage to make your piece look awesome, okay? So let's go ahead and continue with the fire. Let's talk about the fire for a second. So the fire was actually very simple. I created a simple shape like this, clean, and then I went in and I duplicated that. I duplicated it and blurred it. You can see there, changed the color. And when you blur it, that becomes, oh, look at that. It just becomes the edgy glow, And then this piece, or this shape here, it's that sharp shape, but then I just added a blur to it. Again, that's how I make things feel kinetic. That's how I make things feel like they're moving. Start sharp like this, and keep that sharp layer in case you mess it up and need to go back. And then you can add on your effects, right? This is enough, but see how much that blurred kind of glow effect adds to it? It makes it feel much more bloomy and awesome. Makes it feel bloomin' awesome. Foreground, again, very simple, very simple. Grass in the front, a little bit of embers on those sticks. We like it. We like it. Let's talk about those effects, ladies and gentlemen. Effects are going to be all of these right here. All of this lovely layer labeled effects. We've got levels, we've got vibrance, we've got color balance, and we've got curves, okay? Let's go ahead and dissect these one at a time. Oh, and our ever important anime bloomy beautiful layer, our beautiful anime bloomy layer. Let's not forget that. That's probably the first one that we need to talk about. And I've talked to you guys about this before. How do you create this layer? Let's go ahead and set it to normal, and let's set it to 100% opacity. This layer, creating this layer, is as simple as merging everything down. In fact, I'll do a new tutorial on it. Let's say you got your piece to about this point and you're like, okay, this looks good, but I want to bloom it. Shift Control Alt E will bring everything together. Whoops. Shift Control Alt E will bring everything together. You're going to go ahead and go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Go ahead and set that to, I don't know, 12.5 might be a little much, maybe about 5 pixels. That looks good. Again, it'll differ depending on the resolution of your piece, but you want to get something around there. You're going to set that to hard light. And then you are going to lighten it up like this. And see how that gives it like this awesome kind of lovely glow. And of course, you never want to do 100% opacity unless this is like some crazy anime shot, like some crazy, you know what I'm talking about, like the crazy bloom where it's like the pretty girl and it's like all crazy out of focus. That's when you would go 100%, right? That's when you do that. But in this case, you want it to be very subtle, right? Very, very subtle. You can click it on and off, on and off. I find that it brings, you see how it like fixes some of those values behind the character? I think it makes your bright lights brighter and it makes your shadows darker. Therefore, making your piece more clear, okay? That is step one, ladies and gentlemen. Step one. Let's go ahead and set this back to what it was, hard light, and let's drop it down to 30%. And let's go through these one at a time, the levels. What is happening with these levels? Well, levels is kind of a, oh man, I don't know if I want to get crazy into this because I feel like each one of these things could be its own tutorial. But in general, when you pull up levels, oh yeah, and all of these are adjustment layers, by the way. All of these are gotten to by going to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then all of them are in here. You can see what I'm working with right now is levels. I also had like a vibrance one on there. Where is vibrance? There it is, vibrance, got color balance, all of those things. In fact, I would highly recommend you look up another tutorial if you would like to know any of these in advance. There's plenty on YouTube, and I'll probably be doing one in the future. But in the meantime, let's just quickly go through these because I want to keep this tutorial to a semi-general length, okay? But you can see here, messing around with these levels will, again, allow you to dial in the levels of your piece. And all the while, you can ask yourself, am I losing too much information? See, if I move this too far to the right, we're losing too much information in the dark, so we need to move it more to the left. But too much to the left, and now it's kind of washed out. It's a washed out piece. See that? Everything's just kind of gray. We want that vibrance in there. So that's a good place for you to mess around with your levels. Vibrance, just in general, I don't even know if I can see a difference on this. But vibrance allows you to just kind of mess around with your saturation and play around with your colors. Again, I find vibrance, a little bit of extra vibrance goes a long way. The color balance, let's see what we've got here. Just in general, looks like my highlights are moving towards cyan. I think that cools off. That just cools off the piece and balances it out. Whereas if it's red, see how everything is just, it feels like it's within like a molten lava volcano. It's like, no, we want to make sure that things are, we want to make sure that the background is in the nice cool color. So that way Mocha's skin, being a warm value and color, will pop off, right? We like popping off. Next, let's go to the midtones. We're moving things towards green and red. Again, I can't really tell you exactly why I'm doing this. These are all just me experimenting and see what I like. And I highly recommend you do the same. Last is curves. Curves, it looks like what I did here was I went to the red channel and then I kind of brought it down. And what that's doing, as you can see here, it's actually kind of, it does something to the clouds specifically behind Mocha's face. Do you see that? From here to here, from here to here, it's kind of changing things up a little bit. So for whatever reason, I liked that, and you can do that again just by moving over to your red channel. And yeah, this definitely deserves its own definitely deserves its own tutorial for the future. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and put on our made of metal title, our signature for the instas, and the final piece. The final, I actually flattened everything down, and then I did a final color pass, or like a final adjustment to brightness contrast to really just get everything looking good. And that took us from here to here to here. And you can see just going back and forth. We've got ourselves a nice piece. Squint your eyes. We've got some good values, and that makes us happy, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you make a dynamic illustration. Hope that helps you out. Now, we have a very special surprise for those of you who stuck around. I know I spoiled it, but not only will this PSD be available on Patreon, this as well as all these other ones, I'll be uploading these other versions onto Patreon, but I really wanted to do something to say thank you to everyone who has been watching and tuning in and sending all these nice, just these nice messages on Reddit and Instagram, just saying how I'm helping you with your art and just inspiring you and getting you out of slumps that you may have been in for years. When I get those messages, it really makes me feel like I am just living my purpose. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for that. And, but hey, talk is cheap, and I like to give things away for free. So what I'm going to start doing is every month we have a ton of PSDs, and I'm not going to have a chance to do tutorials on every single one. So I figured a good way for me to say thank you is to start releasing some of my PSDs for free. Hey, how about that? And this one is going to be the first one. So if you're interested, go ahead and head on over to Patreon. Granted, this is free, so I'm super thankful to everyone who has pledged and supported the show. But you can also download this one for free on Patreon. And if you really enjoy it and you really enjoy all of these tutorials and want to download more of them, then at that point you can pledge, and I will be forever grateful to you. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and end today's show. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, it means so much. I can't wait to continue doing this for you. And I'm really excited about continuing with Made of Metal because, like I said, a lot of work is getting done, and I'm prioritizing doing more illustration and experimenting for myself. And I'm wanting to bring what I learned to you guys, for you guys to both download, check out the PSDs, as well as give you quick, concise, I guess it's kind of tough because when you have a finished piece, there's so many things that you can go into. So I appreciate your patience while I try to figure out the new format for my show that both allows me to focus on my personal work as well as give tutorials to you guys. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Instagram because we got a ton of stuff. We got a ton of stuff to go through. You guys take care of yourself. Enjoy this awesome music as well as the Instas. And I'll see you next time. Take care.